Science for Everyday Decisions, series by Center for Sustainable Development at the Earth Institute, Columbia University. For your consideration for a more sustainable life through education for sustainable development.
Morning. Welcome everyone to our daily Eco Ambassador session. It has been such a rock in all of our lives, I think, over these past few weeks to not only get to see each other's faces or hear each other's voices, but to be inspired by this young generation and all the great ideas that you all are bringing and the amazing research that you're sharing with us each day. And we are very excited today to have C.Jenco, who's a junior researcher, and his teammates, Brandon, and is it Pigott? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing.
It's Pigott.
Pigott, okay.
Yeah.
And you all are exploring the potential impacts of green roof technology on energy expenditure. And you've been working on constructing a prototype green roof and the comparison blacktop shingle roof. So we're excited today to learn more from you on what you've learned in your research so far and hopefully share some additional ideas for you. So Will, do you want to say anything more about the project and introduce the students before we begin?
Sure. So I guess just to add to that, last week we got to hear from Sarah Pigeon from Solar One, and her discussion about the importance of saving energy. And I feel that there's just a clear alignment between Chris's and Brendan's project. This idea of just being mindful of energy uses and just understanding what we can actually do to bring about real impacts on energy usage, right? So that we can each do our own little part, in saving the environment. And so Chris and Brendan, they're juniors at Plainedge High School. And I had the pleasure of working with them first through robotics, and then their drive to explore engineering and robotics just translated naturally into this type of engineering. And so here we could see just this cross-cutting research that utilizes engineering for an environmental angle. So I guess with that, Chris, you want to take it?
Yeah, should I just screen share the presentation over? Or
Yes, you should be able to access it when you click share on the bottom of the screen.
yes. Screen 2, share screen. All right. Gonna throw this in present mode. This is gonna go back one. Okay, so we have projecting energy consumption and savings in a prototype green roof building, obviously with myself, C.Jenco, my partner, B.Pigott, and N.LoFaso, who couldn't make it today. So, Brendan?
Yeah, so so here we have the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Babylon was very interesting as they had the first green roof. It was a lot more intensive than more modern green roofs. It had a lot larger plants and you were able to walk through it. So they were considered more intensive green roof. More modern green roofs right now are considered extensive. They have usually flatter vegetation, and it's a lot lower maintenance than intensive green roofs.
And the main problem with modern roofs and conventional roofing is that they produce so much heat just by absorbing sunlight, and they're not very insulative. So your conventional HVAC systems in your urban buildings, they usually have to work more, which produces more energy. And according to the EPA in 2014, if you look at the pie chart there, 25% of global carbon emissions were because of electricity and heat production. So and that's majorly from most buildings in major cities because they all run pretty similar HVAC systems. So the purpose of the green roof is that they can cut down on the carbon emissions and thus reduce the load that HVAC systems have to undertake. So it can reduce the energy spending and reduce carbon emissions.
Yeah, so the way the green roof works is that it covers they have the layer of vegetation on the top of the roof, and it provides shading, which is it blocks sunlight from reaching the lower levels of the roof, and in doing so, it protects it doesn't heat up as quickly, and it offers insulation in that it utilizes evapotranspiration to cool the roofs, and in doing so lowers costs and whatnot.
So what we have mainly, the main problem that the green roofs are trying to solve is what's known as the urban heat island effect. And a heat island essentially is just a pocket of heat, a small like heat pocket you can see on a thermal imaging map. So what they do is you have a top-down bird's eye view of any given city, and you can see with thermal imaging which buildings are producing more heat and they're releasing it through the roof. So there's a few pre-existing studies that we looked at. One of them in Toronto, where they looked at where 2 green roofs were able to reduce the peak summer temperature of a given gym in Toronto by 35 degrees Fahrenheit, compared to, say, a normal conventional roof. It would have been 35 degrees hotter. And they also found that they were able to reduce the total heat flow from the roof into the gym by anywhere from 70 to 90% in compared to the conventional roof. So it's pretty evident that the green roofs actually do have a significant effect on reducing heat. And in Central Florida, they compared the average daytime, summertime temperatures of a green roof versus a conventional roof. And they found that the average summertime temperature of a green roof was 91 degrees Fahrenheit in Florida, compared to the 130 degrees Fahrenheit of a conventional green roof. So that's a significant temperature reduction from the green roof. And they also found that the extra strain on the HVAC system under the conventional roof was 700 watt hours per day more than the green roof. So they were also spending a significantly larger amount of energy trying to keep that conventionally roofed building at a constant temperature throughout the entire summer. And in the study done by Columbia University, it essentially showcased the insulative and cooling properties of green roofs. And they conducted a study during both summer and winter, and they found that during the winter, the green roof lost less heat from the inside of the building. So it actually acted as another layer of insulation on the roof, keeping the heat in, so the HVAC system wouldn't have to heat the building as much. And during the summer, it was actually more effective at keeping heat out of the building from just the surrounding air, so the internal HVAC system wouldn't have to cool the building as much. And from the study based on Central Florida, I was able to calculate the total carbon emissions. So what I did was, since the study was conducted in 2006, I went to the United States Energy Information Administration, their website, and their data only dated back to 2008. So this is about a rough estimate. But in 2008, they actually stated that 1 pound of coal could generate approximately 10,000 British thermal units, or BTUs, of electricity. So then I calculated that it would take about 1/4 pound of coal per day to cool that conventionally roofed building. And since the study lasted for 59 days, from July 4th, 2005 to September 1st of the same year, I also was able to calculate that over this time span, it would have taken an additional 14 3/4 pounds of coal to provide the approximate 700 watt hours a day needed to cool the building. So an additional 14 3/4 pounds of coal over roughly 60 days, I mean, you're using a significant amount of coal to just cool one building. So it's significant, the effect that the green roof can have on energy spending and carbon emissions.
Though there's a couple of qualifications that you need to have for a green roof. Vegetation wise, you definitely want a plant that can survive in different conditions, such as the summer and winter here in New York, as we have all 4 seasons. We like a low height one because it's very much easier to maintain. For growth medium, you want to use something like pumice, terracotta, shale, anything that won't expand over time with changes to the temperatures. And you need a drainage layer so the water doesn't get stuck in and add a lot of weight to the structure. You need a waterproof membrane to prevent damage on the structure itself. And really the only difference between a green roof and a non-green roof building that you have to account for is you have to account for the added weight of the facilities of the green roof.
So what we've been doing here is we canned out really quickly a plan to construct two live, like in my backyard, a one control shed that will have a standard black roof and one green roof shed of the same size, same dimensions, same materials. So what we're going to have is we're going to have temperature sensors in both sheds to collect temperature data, and they're all going to be made out of the same materials. The green roof is going to have plants that are native to Long Island, generally speaking, on an extensive green roof, which is what we're going to be using here. The plants are low height. They're rugged enough to survive summer and winter, so we're going to be using something like a sedum, and we're going to be using plants that are local to our area, so we're going to get in contact with our local nurseries and see what kind of plants we can source from them. In terms of data collection, I've been working with a Raspberry Pi and a temperature sensor so that we can hook those up into the sheds and collect temperature data live every half hour. And then from there, the temperature sensor is going to collect data. I've coded the Raspberry Pi to transmit that data to a Google Sheets file that everyone in our team can view and look at the data. And from that Google Sheets file, we're going to be sending it to IBM's SPSS software so we can do statistical analysis on the data and see, what are the exact kind of effects that the green roof can have on temperature reduction and energy usage and things like that. And then from there, we can calculate the costs that it would cost to heat or cool either building. So what we can do is we can calculate the energy expenditure on climate control for a standard home. So find out how much the average home would spend on climate control. And then we can apply that value to our prototype green roof and traditional structure to see how much we would be spending to either heat or cool either structure. And we can do this using that energy usage monitor that's on the right of the screen there. And what we do is that will give us a wattage of how many watts an outlet is outputting. So then what we do is we would plug in, since the buildings are so small, just a standard like window AC unit. And then from there, we can find out how much power each one is drawing at a given time. And then if our hypothesis and all our data that we've done so far is correct, the green roof shed should be drawing less power versus the standard conventionally roofed one, which means that less power means you use less coal to produce the electricity, and overall your carbon footprint is going to be smaller within that green roof shed.
Our goals for public outreach is we basically just want to educate and introduce our community to green roofs and show them the saving potential that you can achieve through green roofs. And hopefully, once everyone sees that, we can see an increase in green roof technology in and around our community.
Any questions?
I have one question.
Yes.
You said you were building the two structures in your yard, right?
Yes.
How do you make sure that both of them get the same amount of sunlight or shadow per day? Because even a slight difference in location might make those factors different for each structure.
It's hard to show you right now, but there is one spot in my yard that's big enough to fit both sheds side by side, and it's open enough. It receives pretty much constant sunlight all day till the sun sets.
Interesting. What would you recommend if someone were trying to replicate such an experiment in their own yard to kind of look out for those factors? Or what other factors might they want to look out for to make sure that they're both, it's a proper control?
The biggest thing is consistency between the control and your variable, in this case, which is the green roof. So you want to make sure that when you construct those two sheds and when you place them in wherever in your yard, you need to make sure that they're close enough to each other so that the sunlight difference between the two, it's not going to be so drastic that it's going to skew your data. And you need to make sure that the construction of the two sheds is pretty much spot on between the two of them, because any slight discrepancy within the construction, it's going to make a difference. So really the biggest thing is just know what you're doing, and when you build the shed, you know, if you don't, have someone there who does, so that they can guide you along the way.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I had a question about your plant selection.
Yes.
You mentioned that you're going to be looking at kind of local plants, and that makes complete sense. But I was just curious, does the type of plant make a difference in the efficiency? Like, or is it any plant that can absorb, you know, CO2? Is that, are there any metrics on that?
As far as plant types, they're the two main types of green roofs, you know, intensive versus extensive. With extensive green roofs, which is what we're going to be doing, the main type of plant is like low growing. It's not going to grow very high. It's almost like a moss. So it'll cover most of the surface area that's on the roof with, you know, vegetation. And it'll be, the main requirement is that it has to be, you know, like durable or rugged enough so that you don't have to constantly maintain it during the summer and the winter months, and you can just kind of set it and forget it and look at it, you know, just every so often to make sure that it's not dead. Something that can pretty much just take care of itself.
So it's more like the coverage that it would give to
Yeah.
the roof surface is the main. That makes sense. And the other question is, if you don't mind, can you go back to the slide on, there were 2 points where you mentioned the costing. Yeah, that was one. And then at the very beginning, yeah, that one was one. And then there was a calculation that you did before, right? For the energy use. So are these types of calculations different, or did they use a similar kind of method?
My calculation here on this slide was based off of the amount of coal it would take to produce a given amount of electricity. So this calculation was more focused on the carbon footprint of a green roofed building versus one that's conventionally roofed. This one here is about how much it would cost in dollars to heat or cool any given building. So this is more of an economic standpoint than the other one was.
Got you. That makes sense. Great. Yeah.
And then I guess to add on to Tara's question, I looked it up, and definitely you guys want to, it sounds like you guys are really going to control the location to ensure that there's equal sunlight. And I was looking, like, there's got to be a sensor that measures light intensity from the sun. And they mentioned a pyranometer. I don't know if you guys have heard of this, a PYRANO meter. And I'm wondering if we could, I wonder, you know, maybe on our end, we could see whether or not we could hook one of these up to your Raspberry Pi, and you'll have these parallel measurements to ensure that both sunlight intensity for both of the structures is the same. And then if that's the case, then we can tell that, I guess, the temperature differentials between the two structures are not due to, right, different sunlight levels.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly realistic.
Even I love Haynes' question, and you know, it just makes me think another variable could be different plant types, to see if any has a, you know, more of an impact than another.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a variable that can be looked into.
Structures you can fit in your backyard.
Yeah, I don't know the likelihood of us being able to do that, but it is definitely a variable. But
and just double checking for the record, your parents know you're doing this, right?
Yes, absolutely.
This is great. I have a question on, again, very different context. 2 questions. So one is, in India, when I was growing up, and even now, they were basically painting the roofs white because it would reflect the heat back. So I was wondering if you've looked into that. I just sent in the chat section a BBC article. I don't know how authentic it is, but it's basically saying that if you paint the roofs white, it's going to reduce the heat absorb, because in India, of course, the problem there is like there's a lot of heat and it gets absorbed, and then people don't have AC, so it becomes unbearable to actually live in houses. So just wanted to know if you've thought about something like that, a color that emits the heat out, or, and then my second question is whether for areas like in New York, New Jersey, when there is snow during winter, would that affect, like, if will there be like a lot of snow, instead of it sliding down, it will just remain there, and there might be just more seepage of snow or roof damage in that case?
So in the case of your question about the color of the roof, I actually found data from a study from Columbia on they actually compared green versus black versus white. So the difference between white and green, that it was there, but it was marginal compared to the difference between green and black. So they didn't necessarily focus on it that much, but there is data on it, but the difference between green and white is definitely going to be smaller than green versus black. And your question about the snow, your concern was that the snow there would be too much weight on the roof. So they do take this into account when they engineer buildings with green roofs on them in snowy areas and things like that. So when they do this, they make sure that the green roof has enough support to not only support the roof itself, but to also make sure that any natural causes or something like that the roof would be able to withstand it. So in areas that do get more snow, I think that when they engineer the green roofs, when they design them, they take that into account.
I see. So the weight is already taken in. So it's not like, anyone who wants to make a roof can try this on the side and see if they can, make one. It's not as easy as like, laying like a carpet of a native plant, which is much lower in height. It has a science behind it. It has there will be a lot of other nuances that will be taken into account, right? You can't, it's not as easy as like, I decide one day I need to build this on top.
Yeah, definitely.
The main focus of like our project is if large contracting companies who do this, professionally, look at using green roofs as a substitute for their buildings instead of the conventional black roofs. So when you have people who have years of roofing experience, they know what they're doing when they do this, and they build the large amounts of buildings that they do.
So there must be a lot of cost involved in it also, and then so I'm wondering whether the cost of making it, maybe after you've done your study to see what works, what doesn't work, if you can also look at the cost effectiveness of this particular technology of green roofing versus just the costing of does the cost of constructing this green roof, one-time cost, does it offset the cost of the energy consumption later on, just to give a sense of how much money is consumed? And then of course I would assume that you need to take into account repair and maintenance and re-roofing of some sorts after a year or so.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's what we're hoping to find out. We're hoping to find out whether or not, like you said, the cost of the green roof and the amount that it saves from energy consumption would offset the cost of what it costs to actually install it. We haven't found that data yet, but that is part of what we're hoping to find.
Very nice. I think, this project will be very helpful for our one of our centers in Telangana, in India, for our computer center. We have put in solar panels, but there is also another space that is there to do this kind of work, and it might be, just the process that you follow will be helpful for a project for our girls, in India, to see how much they can learn from it and see if they can do something there, because definitely heat is a big problem there. And I am in terms of like, using a very they'll probably use like local materials and other things, so this process might be very interesting for them to try this out in a much smaller scale. So we are definitely interested to see how the study turns out, first of all, and then see if there could be some variation in the process, or at least if you try out a model, maybe we could try to do something similar in India in a much smaller scale, with the help of our students there.
And the buildings there are mostly concrete, which is not conducive to, maintaining temperatures. So if this kind of thing can be implemented there or applied there, it would be really helpful.
And the roof structure is also flat. So I assume that it will be easier than the slanted roof that we have here, because then obviously you have to manage the entire, the vegetation, or whatever you call it, like the moss type thing on top.
Yeah.
There it will be much more flat. They'll just use like the moss which is used. I don't know if you guys in India, they use this moss to they have these coolers. So basically it uses the same technology. The coolers have this moss around them, and the water percolates through the cooler, and then because of the cool air with the moss, there's cold air coming out. They usually don't have ACs in many places in India, so they could use a similar moss, maybe not the green. So I'm also very interested to know whether is it the green color that affects things, or can it be any organic material that will help out to reduce the temperature?
I think with green roofs, Brendan touched on this before on one of his slides, where he mentioned that the cooling process with green roofs is really attributed to the process of evapotranspiration, where the plants would absorb the water from their roots and then it evaporates on their leaves. So then the process of evaporation will cool down the surrounding air and the surface of like the roof. And with the larger green roofs, where you have large plants that, you can walk through the green roof, the shade from like large trees and vines and things like that also provides another aspect of cooling. But for what we're doing, it's mainly water evaporating from the plants that's doing all the cooling, as opposed to just the color.
Very interesting. I definitely would like to learn more about this process, and maybe make like some videos of the shed that you've constructed outside, just to see step by step what's going on, how are you measuring, and maybe just recording things, so that you can make it much more like a workshop type thing for others who might want to do this, and maybe update things. We will be happy to host those, short videos to see where the project has reached and where you guys are, and get everyone's reaction and see how it's turning out.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea.
One other question I had, you mentioned that ideally you would have the whole roof covered with greenery or vegetation of some kind, right?
Yes.
Does that mean that there really isn't much of an impact if part of a roof is covered? Like, is it exponentially more effective if it's fully covered, or would there still be some impact if it's partially covered?
I think there would still be some impact if it was partially covered. If you wanted to, say, partially cover with vegetation, the best case scenario that I would see for, green energy and renewable energy and that kind of thing would be on the part that isn't covered, place like a solar panel, so that you're not relying on the standard power grid to generate your electricity, and instead you're using the sun, so that even though you are using energy to cool your building more, it's not from the standard means of producing it through burning coal and natural gas and fossil fuels. So it's possible to partially cover your green roof, like to partially cover your roof with green, but I think for the best results, it would probably be a full coverage.
That makes sense. I'm just thinking, you know, for people who aren't doing this at scale, but maybe want to try something at their own home, you know, is it worth, you know, what are some worthwhile ideas people could try out, you know?
Yeah.
Thank you.
That would be a good variation. What are the things that, you know, common people can do in the houses? What are the things that you require really an engineer to do, and other things that a commercial you know, place could do, so that you're covering all the bases, because definitely, you know, they'll have many, your videos will be seen by many people, so it might be interesting to keep that base wider as you go along. Great. I think Ishika is there. Any other questions from Ishika, or I'm not sure who else.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
No, I think there were some other people on the call also, Ishika and Veda, but I don't see Veda now. Maybe Ishika has a question or not really. Ishika?
No.
No questions. Great.
That was very educational. I mean, I learned a lot, and I really do hope you take Radhika's advice and share some of your schematics of what you've been working on in your yard. It will be very interesting, and yeah, I think this is going to have great implications for people who are doing this more at scale, but also, you know, if there's tips that people can do in their own homes and their own lives to think about things like having some kind of green roof. Although I was going to make a joke earlier, you said something about, you know, that this is intended for bigger scale. And I was like, so maybe we shouldn't be climbing on our roofs while we're all quarantined at home and planting things. It does sound pretty fun, but maybe a little dangerous. So yes, very interesting. And does anyone else have any other questions or comments? Will, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Sure. I guess, you know, just seeing what students like Chris and Brendan are working on, it really stresses home, I think, two main points. And that really is, you know, that education needs to be interdisciplinary and it needs to be applied. And, you know, I see Chris and Brendan working, and what I see is, you know, they're teaching themselves Raspbian, working with the Raspberry Pi. They're learning CAD as they go to design the structure, right? And then for data analysis, they're working with SPSS, and then simultaneously applying the soft skills of communication, persuasion, documentation, and all of this to bring about just a meaningful change. And what I find so inspiring too is, you know, they're students. You know, I wish I had this type of education, right? I wish I had like their ability. And they're really showing that, you know, incrementally, anyone can bring about lasting change. So in essence, like, guys, you're awesome. Keep it up, right? Keep up the documentation, right? You really have a chance to showcase your work, right? And really inspire students, right, to follow in your footsteps, right? What you do in your backyard now could translate into something great.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Just one other thought I just had was, I feel like now's the time to disseminate any, you know, how to kind of replicate some projects like this, because everyone is stuck at home and it is a great time for backyard experiments. So yeah, we look forward to seeing more from you, and thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having us on.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
I think that's
Thank
it.
you.